All right, we're here today with Tyler Axilbund. Tyler, what's going on?
Nothing much, just finished up school. We graduated this past Saturday, so been kind of going through the rounds of that, hanging out with family, some friends. It's been an exciting time.
Yeah, and you just did your encounter for the last 2 weeks of school with Baltimore Police. I want to hear all about it.
I did. So I did ride-alongs for 2 weeks with the Baltimore Police Department, primarily in the Southwest District and a little bit in the Northern District. But I mean, it was an absolute blast. It was, again, 2 weeks of just straight ride-alongs in the city.
What made you want to do this?
I have family friends in the department, so two sergeants, again, one in Southwest, Sergeant Luddy, one in Northern District, Sergeant Bucksbaum. So I didn't really know what I wanted to do for my encounter. They offered to take me along with them, and I said, why not? Sounded fun.
So what was it like? So I guess preparing for this encounter experience, preparing to be a Baltimore police officer for 2 weeks, ride along with them, what did you have to do to get ready to go?
Honestly, I just kind of like to jump into things, and that's what I did. I had really no preparation, but
that's allowed, right? Like you can just sign up and go do that. There's no paperwork or background checks or anything you had to do.
They did. I had to give them my ID, so they had to run, make sure I didn't have any outstanding warrants. I had to sign a release form that said if something were to happen to me while I was out there, that they wouldn't be held liable.
Okay.
Which luckily nothing did happen. But aside from that, it was really just go down there. I kind of started Tuesday the 14th, so go down there on the 14th and then have fun.
Wow. So what did you see on some of these ride-alongs that you went on? And what hours, like what hours were you in the car?
So the way the Baltimore Police Department works is there are 3 shifts. There's Adam, Baker, and Charlie shift. I was mostly on Baker shift. So roll call was 6:45 in the morning, and then we got off around 2:45 in the afternoon. One time I did Charlie shift with Northern District, which was about that 3 o'clock to about 10:45 range. But one thing I didn't know is that crime really follows the weather. So the first few days I was doing it, the weather was really poor. So raining a lot. That meant a bunch of people were inside. And when they're all inside, that's a lot of domestic disputes. So we got called to a lot of disputes between neighbors who were, too loud, banging doors and all that, or husband and wife, boyfriend and girlfriend, that sort of thing. Once the weather started lightening up, that's when we got a lot of, stuff with cars. There was more drug activity, still the domestic disputes. There was a shooting, so that kind of stuff.
What did you see that you maybe didn't expect? Like, what are some of the things that you encountered on these 2 weeks that you weren't really expecting to see, or would you learn?
A lot just more police procedure. So we were kind of contrasting the county versus the city police, because again, I was with the city. And in the city, they have a lot more stuff going on. So traffic violations, for example, you're less likely to get pulled over for traffic violations in the city as you are in the county or on the highway. So depending on the department, they have different mandates or task force that they push certain objectives. So for instance, I met with somebody from WATF, which is a Warrant Apprehension Task Force. Those are the guys who go into the vacant buildings and everything. They look for people with warrants. So that's a big initiative they're pushing. There are also RAT, which is Regional Auto Theft Task Force, which those are the guys who are going after all the stolen cars. So it's just that's what I thought was really interesting. But again, it's just one thing that was really interesting is just how many stolen cars there are. Because I don't know if you know in the news, but Kia and Hyundai, they're fairly easy to break into apparently. So there were a lot of those going around. There were a lot of high schoolers who break into cars. So one thing I found out is a high school near the district I was working, they would steal cars, drive them to school, and dump them in a certain lot. So every time you drove by there, you could see a stolen car or two in that lot.
Interesting.
Super interesting.
So when you go after somebody who has stolen a car, what does that look like? What is the procedure of doing that?
It depends. So if they're currently in the car in the city, they mostly don't chase the cars. They only chase the cars if
sort of follow the car, track it.
Ish, yeah. So if Foxtrot's the helicopter squadron, who I also met with, if Foxtrot's in the air, then they'll follow the car with their cameras. But if they're not, honestly, sometimes they let them go. Because the issue is the officer is held liable if the person who they're chasing crashes into another car or crashes, hurts somebody or themselves. The only time that they'll chase people in cars is if that person is an obvious threat to themselves or another officer. Mm-hmm. So they were telling me how at one point they had somebody who's shooting out the back of their window. That's when they had to follow them. But if somebody doesn't brake for a stoplight or whatever, or we pull up and they run, they're most likely not going to be chased, or they're not going to be chased far.
Did you have to chase anyone during these 2 weeks?
We didn't have to chase anybody. We almost had to. So this was my second week doing it. We just had come from a call of a shooting that had been wrapped up. So we had one more call as a domestic dispute. Some guy was hitting his girlfriend and his daughter. So we pull up, the girlfriend's out front, screaming at us, screaming at the boyfriend, saying that he's going to go to jail. We get closer to him. He hops in his car and he tries to ram our car. And we try to pull around, but if we're facing this direction, he was right here. So he tries to hit us and then skirts around. And at that point, we couldn't, because we couldn't get turned around in the street fast enough. Come to find out, he had 2 warrants already, which is why he ran. And then trying to ram us got him a 3rd warrant, and he ended up getting a 4th warrant trying to break back into his girlfriend's house. So that was the closest thing we got to a chase. But I was with sergeants for 2 weeks predominantly, so that meant that we were more in an advisory role than anything else. So for the most part, I went with an officer 1 or 2 days, but with the sergeants, we would arrive later to scenes if somebody asked for a supervisor or something of that nature, and we would more observe than anything else, rather than make actual arrests.
So did it seem like you were always busy, you're always working on something, you're always doing something, or were there some down times where you could just sort of wait for something to arise and talk to the other officers you're working with?
So again, when I was with Sergeant Luddy in the Southwest District, the first maybe 4 hours of the day, so I would get there probably around 6:20. From 6:20 to maybe 9:30, 10:30, that was mostly administrative time. So that's when he would spend looking at body cam footage, looking at, make sure case reports are all right. However, the time I went with Officer Brandt of the Southwest District, he was a patrol officer, we went out right after roll call. So that was going from call to call to call all day, whereas when I was with the sergeants, there was about 3 or 4 hours of administrative time before we went out to calls. And again, it just depends on the day. When it was rainy out and cold out, there weren't as many calls. But when it was super warm out, we kept getting them. Break-ins, drug activity, that sort of thing.
Rolling up to some of these scenes, were you pretty nervous? Were you freaked out? I mean, I feel like as a high school student who has maybe never experienced something like this, it could be pretty nerve-wracking to enter a situation like this for the first time and witness it and be involved in it.
Maybe. I was really excited. I mean, if we're being completely honest, you feel kind of invincible in a police car. Yeah. Especially they gave me a bulletproof vest. Yeah. So that also kind of added to it. But I was more just excited. The 2 or 3 times I did have to stay in the car when we got on scene was when there were calls of an armed person in a vacant building or shots fired and they thought the person with the weapon was around. Or we got one call in front of an urgent care center of somebody who was being disorderly and he had some psych problems. So they had to make sure that he was calm before they let me go. But other than that, I mean, I was right with them. When they were, at one point, they were looking for somebody with a warrant. They were clearing a vacant building. So 2 officers with their guns drawn were going in front of me. And then I was behind, 3rd in the row with my little vest on and everything. And it was definitely really exciting. I think I probably should have been more scared than I actually was. But I'm here today. So nothing bad happened.
Wow. That's a great experience. I mean, scary for sure, but it seems like a great experience. I mean, some people do an encounter and they get coffee for people and they don't really learn much, and it's sort of a waste of 2 weeks, which it's a good thing that it's only 2 weeks, because it's like you can try something that maybe you don't want to do as an adult, that you figure that out. But for you, I think it's a really good experience to be able to see some of the things that are happening in the city that you sort of grew up in. and get a better sense of Baltimore and crime and some of the things that are happening downtown in the city.
Definitely. I mean, again, driving around, I had gone to a lot of parts I hadn't seen before. And even in the Northern District, which is Roland Park area. I live in Roland Park. I've gone to school in Roland Park for the past 15 years. I saw some areas that I'd never been to before, which was really, really rewarding.
What did you do when you were up here in sort of Roland Park area? Was there anything going on that you had to investigate?
No, there was more just patrolling. We had one domestic dispute that we had to go to. That was people had been fighting. There's a guy and he had 2 children with 2 different women, and they were getting into it and all that, and gone to the grandmother's house. So we had to go to that, and there was some de-escalation.
So what do you do for that? Do you get out of the car as an intern?
I was there as well. A lot of the questions I kept getting, what is he doing here? Or are you a trainee? Something like that.
This high school guy.
Pretty much. It's funny, a drug dealer, when we rolled up on him and his crew, a lot of those or his guys left, but I was still there, and somebody asked if it was bring your kid to work day. He did. So that was kind of funny. Yeah, a lot of people didn't know what I was doing, but there was still an air of respect because they didn't know if I was police or not. So they're not gonna give me lip or anything like that. I would tell them I was a ride along. We also told them that I was going into the Army, which I am through ROTC for Tulane. So that kind of helped, I guess, introduce me a little bit.
I definitely want to talk about the ROTC. So you want to be in the military?
I do.
For sure. Okay. When did you know that?
Since I was a little kid.
Really?
I didn't know what path I wanted to get there. So
do you have family in the military too?
I do. So I have a lot of family who went through the Naval Academy, some Air Force, some Army. So I definitely knew that I wanted to go to the military. First, I thought I wanted to go to the Naval Academy. Then I started looking into the various jobs, kind of what the Navy would entail and everything. Realized I didn't want to do that. I'm really passionate about aviation, specifically helicopters. And the Army has a big rotary aviation wing or helicopter wing. So I wanted to do that. So then I started looking at West Point, weighing my options between West Point or an ROTC. I was fortunate enough to get a full scholarship for Army ROTC to Tulane. They also cover room and board. And I decided to go that route. I'll head down there in August. And
wow.
I'm super excited.
Good for you. Parents, were they in the military ever?
No, parents weren't, so it skipped a generation, but both sides of my grandparents were. I've had uncles and cousins and all that. So definitely I think there's somewhat of a parallel between policing and the military, just with the structure and the ranks and all of that sort of thing.
Yeah, the regimentation of daily life and the courage that you have to go into some of those situations. I mean, it's very, very similar. My sister, I think I've told you, West Point grad, and she's in the military right now, and her husband is training to be a Green Beret, so he's the real deal. He's a Ranger right now, and yeah, man, I respect all of the people who serve in our country, and I would have loved to maybe do that, but it's not my DNA,
Yeah. It's funny, I tell people that I don't really know what I want to do with my life, so if I can get school for free and blow stuff up while I'm doing it, why not?
Do you know, so what is the ROTC program like at Tulane? Do you know what to expect when you go down there?
So 2 or 3 days a week we'll be in uniform, so camouflage. We'll have an extra class built in there, which will be military instruction. I'll have PT those 2 to 3 days a week in the morning. Aside from that, I'm living a normal college life, so a lot of the Tulane ROTC guys are in fraternities. It's pretty straightforward college life. Then I'll have training, maybe weekend training, maybe once or twice a month. I'll also have summer trainings.
Do you have to show up in a certain physical shape before you get there? Do you have to do like summer workouts and be able to do 200 push-ups first day?
Hopefully not. Definitely after wrestling season, I've kind of gotten a little bit bigger. But part of the application is we had to have a fitness test. So past that, it was good enough to get me my scholarship. I'll definitely need to hit the treadmill a little bit more before I get down there. But I think they'll kind of hopefully at least ease me into it.
Gotcha. Well, I forgot you were a wrestler too.
Yeah, so that's definitely kind of gotten me used to some hard workouts.
Yeah. Yeah. Some of the practices for wrestling are more difficult than the meets, correct?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's different types. So wrestling, you're going for 2 hours. Some of us will lose 3-4 pounds of sweat, depending if you're trying to lose weight or not.
Did you ever have to do that?
Yeah. So at one point, from when I weighed in the beginning of the season to when I was wrestling, I was down 12 pounds. What made that a little bit easier was I got sick during the middle of the season, so that slimmed me down 5 or 6 pounds. But I was able to keep the weight off for the most part. I know some of the other guys, Tyson Sherlock, who's a big wrestler in my grade, committed to Davidson. He has to cut an insane amount of weight, but he's good enough to where he really sees that difference between the weight classes.
Gotcha.
So I was never that great of a wrestler. I'm not gonna, sugarcoat myself, but it's definitely, definitely.
I mean, you guys had a great season, right?
We did. So state champions, conference champions. We got our 2024 on the championship banner for the first time in 30-something years, maybe. So it's definitely a great experience, all thanks to our coaches, including Coach Holmes and Coach Franklin.
Yeah.
And all the wrestlers, obviously.
Now, do you play other sports at Gilman or just wrestling?
Not anymore. I, like a true Maryland kid, who born and raised, played lacrosse at one point, did the whole club thing. But when I came to Gilman from friends in 8th grade, I decided to stop playing scholastically. I wasn't that good. And I know Gilman's super competitive with lacrosse, and that just wasn't what I was looking for.
Yeah. I mean, there comes a time, I think, in some sense, where you sort of have to figure out what your sport is going to be or what you want to commit all those hours to.
Yeah.
And lacrosse is so competitive that I describe some of the club stuff as like an arms race. It's like everybody's doing, X, Y, and Z, summer ball, fall ball, and it seems to be so much a lot of the time. If you're not really bought into it, then why put yourself through all those hours?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, don't get me wrong. I had a blast playing, but it just wasn't my thing in the end.
Yeah. Yeah, wrestlers usually make good face-off guys.
Yeah, especially those short, stockier guys. I know he's not face-off, but Sebastian Chaney.
He had a great season.
He had a phenomenal season.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of that, lent to his just physical toughness, the wrestling.
What position do you play in lacrosse?
I played defender, so that was when I was taller than everybody else. Then everybody caught up to me, and at 5'10", 5'11", I couldn't be a great defender in high school or college anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, lacrosse team had a great season too. So
they did.
It was a good athletic year, I would say, for Gilman.
Definitely.
Right?
A bunch of championships. I know water polo, both varsity
Tennis.
and JV. Tennis, like you said, wrestling.
Lacrosse made it further than I've seen in 6 years that I've been here.
Definitely. Squash also. Then we had a lot of individual athletes, excel, like Bennett Espinshade with golf and all those guys.
Track and field.
Track and field as well. Yeah. So it's been definitely a great year, rewarding senior year.
Was it a good senior year for you?
It was.
Yeah.
I was a little bit hesitant going into it because I had like everybody who has a rough high school year at one point. Mine was junior year. A lot of friendship balancing and all that. But going into my senior year, I was a little bit apprehensive. And then as we started getting more into the hang of it, I loved it. Especially senior retreat. It was an absolute treat to do.
Mm-hmm. You felt like you got tighter with your class on that retreat?
Absolutely. I know, kind of looking at the Gilman class of 2023, it looked like they were so tight, all the time, and they had grade-wide parties and all that, and class of 2024 didn't really have that. But then going into our senior year, that's when it really started to change. Yeah. So we were all together for prom, for both of our dances that we had. There's a lot more cohesion in the grade now.
Yeah, I felt like, from my perspective, I felt like your class really came together this year more so than I've seen other classes come together. I think there's a time when you realize, I'm not going to be with all these people ever again in the same setting other than like the reunion, right? Like you sort of, that some of the cliques and the friend boundaries dissolve and you're just all one crowd of people, which is pretty cool to see.
Definitely. And I think a lot of that is due to Pittman Smythe. He was a great student body president, and he really, talking about his first senior speech of the year, love, and how you all gotta love your brothers in arms and everything. That was, I think, really what kind of ignited it and really got us together as a grade.
I think there's some good senior speeches this year too.
There were, definitely. Yeah. I definitely, and I think myself and a lot of other guys, we made efforts to really pay attention to the senior speeches this year, and there were a ton of really good ones. Again,
Did you give one?
I did not.
You didn't?
I didn't think, at the time it was to sign up, I didn't think I could give anything that hadn't already been said. Looking back on it, I wish I had done it.
You could probably give a really good one now, talking about your Baltimore police experience.
Again,
right?
I have plenty more stories, but it was definitely, I wish I did it in hindsight, but I'm glad that my friends who did give them gave excellent speeches.
What this might be a tough question on the spot, but what is your favorite tradition that Gilman has?
My favorite tradition that Gilman has. Not a specific tradition per se, but definitely the volleyball games. Because more so than I feel like many other sports, the whole school gets together for the volleyball games, again, especially against our rivals, like at least in volleyball with Loyola. Those games are always a treat to go to with the themes, and in our gym, especially when they're in the old gym at the Deaf Dome, they get rowdy.
Yeah.
And it being in the student section, and then seeing in my 8th grade year when we were in the championship at Goucher College, and then seeing how that's, how the program has gone forward, it's been an absolute treat. That's probably my favorite.
Are you a volleyball player too? No.
Used to be. I was a JV warrior for 2 years.
Nice.
Then again, starting to get to my junior and senior year, I stopped playing, started weightlifting instead for wrestling. So
Gotcha.
that's the extent.
What's sort of your role if you're in the student section? Like, what is what role do you play in that group of people?
Me personally, or just?
Are you leading the charge? Or are you
I
don't
think I have the confidence to do that. It's funny. I have the confidence to go do a shooting scene, but not lead a chant in the student section. But definitely, I guess, get the younger kids involved. Because again, I remember when I was in 8th grade and kind of in the back and not really feeling like I was a part of the team or the student section or student body because I wasn't a high schooler yet, and kind of getting those younger kids involved.
Yep.
And that's especially what we saw as we progressed in lacrosse this season. A lot of those younger kids go into the games, which is really rewarding.
Yeah. So at Tulane, what are Tulane's big events or sports or traditions that you're excited about?
Well, there are 5 of us in my grade, including myself, going to Tulane.
Really?
Yeah, so big portion of my grade compared to other schools. And we always joke that in the Tulane information sessions, or when you go for a tour, they always say that there are more festivals than days in the year in New Orleans. So that's definitely their big thing. Obviously, Mardi Gras, Jazz Fest, Crawfish Fest. So those are what I'm really looking forward to.
I've never been to New Orleans.
No?
No, not once. I'd love to go.
You should. I mean,
What
definitely.
was your first time like down there?
I've only been once, and that was to tour Tulane. And unfortunately, it wasn't the best day to do so because it was pouring rain. But obviously, I fell in love with the campus enough to apply and end up going there. Additionally, I really like the architecture of New Orleans. Architecture is a big passion of mine. And seeing that down there in the French Quarter and in the Garden District was really cool.
Yeah, and Bourbon Street.
Bourbon Street, there's plenty to do in New Orleans.
Do they have a pretty good football team, maybe?
They do. I believe we broke the top 25 this year, which was really nice. That's, again, when we toured, they kept saying, we're a football school now. So hopefully throughout the next 4 years that I'm there, we'll see some more success on the field.
So if you're going down and you're focusing on ROTC, that's sort of your big thing that
Sure.
you're looking forward to.
Yeah.
What happens in the classroom? Do you have a specific area of focus that you want to get into, or is it really just Army military stuff that you're focusing on?
It's really just Army military. I'm a big humanities guy, not so much STEM. So I'm really interested in history, English, that sort of thing. In fact, I know we'll get to it later. The book I brought kind of has to do with that.
Okay.
But I think I'm probably going to major in psychology. Because if I can, that's applicable with the Army. If I want to go into psychological warfare or intelligence, something like that. Additionally, if I want to get out, I could focus on marketing, which I also think is very interesting. That's why I think that's a major that I could really, there are a lot of places I could go.
What happens after ROTC? Like, where do you go? Do you go to the Air Force, or do you continue with that path somewhere?
I'll commission into the Army, so I'll become a second lieutenant. And it depends on the job you do. So I know if I were to go aviation, that would be, there are different service or different time commitments for different jobs. So aviation, they're pumping money in to train you. So that's 12 years active duty required. So if I were to go to aviation, I'm sure I would go to flight school and do all that stuff. If I were to select another job like infantry, they would put me through some more training, and then I would get into a unit. So it really depends on what job I end up doing. But that's
So you want to be rappelling out of helicopters is ultimately what your goal
possibly.
is.
If I go infantry, and I know a lot of divisions, they've switched to air assault, which they do rappel out of helicopters. So I could be doing that. I could also be flying them, or just be a boot on the ground. So it really, I feel like the world's kind of my oyster at this point. There are plenty of cool jobs I get to do.
Yeah, man. I met one of actually the best man at my sister and her husband, both again in the military, at their wedding. Is this guy who flies Apache helicopters in Hawaii. I mean, that sounds unreal.
Yeah, that sounds like an amazing job.
Yeah.
So who knows? That could be me one day.
Yeah.
We'll see what ends up happening, but I'm definitely excited for kind of getting into the ROTC unit, seeing what I do. Also be fortunate enough to either choose air assault or airborne school while I'm in ROTC. So either jumping out of helicopters or airplanes.
Was there an experience that you had when you were younger, other than the family connection? I know you said you had family in the police and in the military, but was there an experience you had that really opened your eyes to the prospect of pursuing the military in the future?
I think it was just my grandfather, who's Naval Academy class of '63, was retired at '06 or captain in the Navy. He was a big figure in my life. He was an Eagle Scout. I'm an Eagle Scout. I've kind of emulated my life after him to a certain extent. So he was really kind of what got me into that originally, as well as my father. My father's big into military history. So when I was young, we would volunteer as docents for Martin State Airport Aviation Museum down in Middle River. So that just being around military, being around aviation constantly, visiting the Naval Academy with my grandfather when I was younger for Veterans Day or Memorial Day, all of that really just culminated into me wanting to go into the military.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, Naval Academy, when I was in high school, my dad took me there because my dad loves military stuff. And, you know, this could have been an option for me if I wanted to play lacrosse maybe at Navy. And I went in there, I walked around campus, I was like, beautiful buildings, right on the water. Annapolis town is great. But I felt like I was in like even at West Point visiting my sister, I felt like you can't really leave. It sort of freaked me out as a high school kid.
That's definitely, I mean, you have to know what you want to do. And that's kind of when I was weighing my options between West Point or Tulane, ROTC, and all that. That's was one of the big factors. Yeah, you get the glory of going to a service academy, and that'll set you up for life with connections. But it's also, these are 4 pretty important years of your life, and you'd be missing out on a lot of that, especially if you've commissioned into the military right after.
Yeah. There would be times in college when my sister and I were in college at the same time when I would be like, you know, going out at night and going to a party, and she'd have to be waking up at like 4:30 in the morning to clean the bathrooms of the military academy. And it's 2 different lives, you know? Yeah, so definitely. It's nice for you. You get sort of the best of both worlds.
Yeah, again, free education, job security, and I get to go to a really fun school. So I'm definitely looking forward to that.
Good for you. Well, let's get to your book rec that you brought in for us, a little Kurt Vonnegut.
Yep. So I picked Cat's Cradle by Kurt Vonnegut. This is a book that I read in Mr. Baker's American Literature of the 60s class this first semester, and it's one that just really stuck with me. Again, it's written in the 60s, so Cold War era, and I'm also a big movie buff, so are you familiar with Dr. Strangelove? Yeah, so this book reminded me a lot of Dr. Strangelove, kind of a satirical take on the Cold War and the threat of annihilation and that sort of thing.
I haven't read much Vonnegut, a couple short stories, but none of his books, which is criminal to say, I know, as an English teacher, but I need to, maybe that's my first one I need to read.
Yeah, again, Cradle. I suggest it's a really light and easy read. I found myself breezing through it. I also, in my second semester English class, World War II with Mr. Hudson, we read Slaughterhouse-Five. Yeah. Another one by Vonnegut, another one of his big books. And I wasn't as big of a fan of that as I was of this, just because Vonnegut has a certain way of writing. And for whatever reason, Slaughterhouse-Five didn't pique my interest as much as this did.
This one's pretty satirical.
This one is very satirical. It has to deal with religion, and again, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the story behind it, but the narrator is writing an article on an Oppenheimer-esque figure who has passed, and he travels to this kind of secluded island where Vonnegut describes it as everything's awful there, yet the one thing that keeps the islanders going is Bokonon, or Bokononism, which is this fictitious religion where nothing is true in the Book of Bokonon, which is their Bible, and nothing really matters, yet this kind of artificial figurehead of the religion is what keeps these islanders going. And then, I won't spoil the book for you, but there's, bad things happen, and it's definitely a twist at the end, but it's, again, one of my favorite books.
It's set on the island?
For the most part, it's set on the island.
Okay. Why is it called Cat's Cradle?
It has to do with, I might be wrong, I think a yo-yo trick.
Okay.
Or something with string.
Gotcha.
Again, it's been about 6 months since I've read the book.
Yeah.
But 6, maybe 7. But it's definitely one of my favorites.
Was that one of your favorite classes that you took at Gilman, the 60s lit class?
Definitely. So I was fortunate enough to take that along with Mr. Baum's Honors U.S. History since 1960. Mm-hmm. So we were learning about the same stuff at the same time in both classes, which is really nice. So we were learning about the Civil Rights Movement simultaneously, Vietnam War a little bit. But Mr. Baker's class, one thing I really enjoyed is he opened each class up with a different song from the 60s.
Oh, I like that.
So I'm also a big music guy,
Yeah.
Especially my dad was born in 1965, so he's given me a lot of his music tastes.
Nice.
So it was nice to hear kind of that music played in the classroom and talk about it with my classmates and all of that stuff.
Yeah, you've got to work some of that. The music is such a big piece of culture,
Definitely.
and I try to do that a little bit in my American history class this year, is just play a song or talk about some artists that maybe in 2024 you might not have even heard of, but it was like a big cultural piece to this decade.
Definitely. And how Mr. Baker spliced the year up or the semester up was really cool. So we talked about psychedelic rock a lot. We talked about Beatlemania a bit, Motown and with Berry Gordy Jr. and all that sort of stuff. And then he's big into Bob Dylan. Mm-hmm. So we had a lot of Bob Dylan, which I'm personally not a massive fan of Bob Dylan, but definitely how Dylan kind of weaves contemporary issues with, the 60s, time of the 60s into his music was just really cool.
Yeah, lyrically.
Yeah.
Dissecting some of his protest or his commentary on the American scene, American life during the 60s.
Definitely. So that was, again, super cool class I got the treat to take this year.
And he took Hudson's World War I and World War II, or just
World War II? So that's another forte of mine. In fact, for spring break, I went out to Tucson, Arizona with my father because there's a massive air museum there full of all sorts of aircraft. So we visited that. Speaking on the Cold War, we also visited the Titan II intercontinental ballistic missile base that's there that you can now tour. So Hudson's World War II class was definitely really cool to kind of be there.
So were most of your favorite classes towards the end of your Gilman career, or did you have any? So you came in when? As a freshman?
I came in as an 8th grader.
As an 8th grader.
Yeah, so my 8th grade year was cut short because of COVID. That was around March when we all got sent home. So that was kind of, got about half of that. That was nice. It was nice to kind of warm up to the guys and meet people before COVID hit.
Yep.
Then my freshman year was also spliced because of COVID. I really kind of got back into the classroom around sophomore year. But I'd have to say my most memorable classes were definitely towards my upperclassmen years of high school.
Yeah.
Most notably, Mr. Baum's, both his American history class in junior year and then his U.S. History since 1960 class senior year.
What did you like most about Baum's sort of style or his tactic in the classroom? Because I'm interested in the way he orchestrates the room.
It's definitely just group stuff. So there's a lot of group stuff. It's not as much lecturing as much as just a communal discussion. And sometimes we'll have these Harkness discussions, which I know Bryn Mawr's big on, with everybody has to say something and you kind of just freely talk about it, which we did do some of that. But the way he conducted the class, it was just very easy to go in and learn. Additionally, especially with the class I took this year, U.S. History since 1960, he incorporated a lot of documentaries and pop culture of the different periods. So as we got into the 80s and 90s, and even early 2000s, he wove in SNL skits.
Yeah.
Kind of talk about political issues or that kind of thing.
Oh, that's good.
Also had us teach chapters of books, which again helped us learn a lot.
Yeah.
And the quizzes that didn't, they weren't that big of a deal, just a handful of points, but that definitely helped test our knowledge.
That's good.
So that was,
teaching U.S. history this year is like sometimes, I don't know, it feels lazy, quote unquote, as a teacher to throw on a documentary or movie, but like everyone loves it and it helps you learn a ton and it helps you visualize everything. It's like it's kind of a really good way of teaching history is through documentaries and movies.
I couldn't agree more. So yeah, and when we got to the Nixon kind of section, we watched All the President's Men, which was super, fun. Mm-hmm. That was towards probably our spring break. So that was a nice little segue into spring break. Additionally, he had us, I know he stole it from, I think, Dr. Yeager over at Bryn Mawr. I shouldn't say steal, borrowed the idea, but had us do movie reviews and compare and contrast the movie from the actual historical event. Yeah. So this year I did Chappaquiddick, which was about Ted Kennedy.
Seen some of that.
And bridge over Chappaquiddick. Yeah. So that was definitely, a cool assignment.
Awesome. Well, Tyler, it's been a pleasure. You're on your way to senior week and the rest of the summer. Anything else planned this summer?
Mostly just spending time with friends.
Yeah.
So I know depending on the depending on the school, kids go at staggered times. So I have a friend who right after senior week he's leaving for school. So
when do you go?
August 13th to the 15th maybe. Okay. So I have a bit of time, as do my closest friends, but some of those other guys who I won't probably see until next summer or a break or maybe a reunion, I really want to get time in with them. Yeah. Make the most of my Gilman career. Yeah. It seems like you had a great run here and loved your time at Gilman, and definitely gonna miss you. I mean, I'm leaving too, but I'm sure the school is gonna miss you, and you're on to bigger and better ROTC at Tulane. So congratulations, and thank you. Hope you enjoy it down there. Thank you. Likewise with your move. Thank you very much.